My name is Gareth Waugh. I'm going to be your session host today for this webinar on Leadership of the Future. We're so glad that you can join us. So we have a few announcements to share before we get going. We're starting to recruit for Ag Forestry Class 44. It's our premier leadership development program, the Ag Forestry program. Please join us for an applicant Q&A session. That's something new for folks going forward, that they will need to join us for this Q&A session to learn more about the program. Those are scheduled for February 15th, March 16th, and April 6th. You know, the Ag Forestry programs really had a big impact on my career, particularly around, the sessions at the Capitol here in Olympia. It's really helped me understand how state government works and how I can best influence and make some progress on issues that are important to me in forestry. So anyway, I hope you'll join the program if you're considering it. I think it's a great step in your career. So I just want to talk about the next webinar series that starts in February, Communicating Across Differences. So that's going to be there on February 9th, 16th, and 23rd from 10 to 11 a.m. And you can find the sign up link there on the Ag Forestry site. It'd be great to see you there. And then to get underway, I'd like to introduce Debbie. Debbie Heiser is an inspirer, servant leader, organizer, connector, mother, speaker, facilitator, friend, and volunteer. Debbie is a thought leader and adjunct professor for Gonzaga. She's active with community nonprofits and provides business and leadership coaching, as well as her podcast through her business, Lead Your Life with Debbie Heiser. Also joining us today, we have Sal Proheem of Class 38. He's the Untitled Division Manager at Taylor Shellfish Farms. We also have Dave Headland from Class 7, so owner of Headland Farms. And we have Hannah Pausch from Class 38, who's the Ag Forestry Program Director. I'm so excited for our panel today. Before I hand it over to Debbie, let's talk about question etiquette. If you could put your questions in the chat, and I'll pop up and interrupt for sort of those urgent questions, and the other more detailed ones we'll leave to the end. Thanks again for joining us. I'm going to hand it over to Debbie. Looking forward to learning today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Gareth. And thank you to everyone who is here. It looks like we have people from all over. And we are going to dig in and ask some leaders in your field, in your industries, what it's like to be a servant leader. And so we did pull a couple of questions from the last webinar, and those are embedded in here. But I really highly recommend to you that as you think about ways that you can go apply servant leadership, and that you can, because servant leadership is a disposition and it's part of who you are. And so as you look at leading teams and leading vision and leading people and the human piece of it, feel free to add some questions in the chat and we will try to go to those. I have a few preconceived questions to ask them, but would jump over to answer the questions that you have specifically before we do that. So please feel free to do that. And I'm also, maybe we'll add Gareth in here too to answer a couple of questions too, if he's willing. So we'll see about that. But I think we'll start out first. I know we're having a little bit of technical difficulty with Sal, and so we'll try to kind of include him too. But why don't we start with Dave? And Dave, if you would introduce yourself and then how you kind of knew that you were a servant leader in training.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for this opportunity. I am a member of Class 7, diversified. My wife and I have a 500-acre diversified crop farm in Western Washington in the Skagit Valley. I think leadership came fairly early, but I'd have to admit that I grew up in a family that had a real strong stewardship ethic, and there was always a strong expectation that you put back into your community, that we were part of the broader community, and that we had that expectation to pay back. And hence, at this point in my career, I'm 70 years old. I put 20 years in on the school board, 15 years on the Northwest Farm Credit Ag Bank board of directors, president of the Western Washington Hort Association, on and on. And, that is a result, of a predisposition on my part, but also a result of investment made by our community. People recognize, Bob Hulbert comes to mind, one of the original founders of the Ag Forestry program, but recognized abilities in me that I didn't necessarily recognize in myself, and really encouraged me to go to the next level, and to put back in the community in that way. And so that's how I got where I am.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Dave. What I hear you saying is it's like this circle of life. And on the resource list, one of the movies that I suggested was The Lion King, because it talks about that, almost like that succession planning. And what I hear you saying is someone invested in you, in the community, and helped you. And so then you paid it forward and did the same. So. Yeah.
And I think that's for all of us in my cohort, recognizing those skills, those behaviors, and those gifts, and encouraging them is a big part of what I do at my point in life.
Great. Thank you, Dave. I appreciate that. And Hannah, what about you? Introduce yourself and how you kind of knew that you were a servant leader in training.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I am the program director for Ag Forestry, but I grew up in Orondo on an apple orchard. And I remember as a kid, I always thought we grew apples. But as I got older, as I listened to the way that my parents talked about what they did, I noticed that they never started with talking about the apples. They started with talking about the people, and they talked about their crew, and they talked about the people on the team, and they talked the stories that my parents held most dear to them were the stories of growth of people. And of course, we love apples and we were passionate about growing apples. But I think what I started to see was that leadership was really about people. And so I think that's how I really got my start in realizing that I enjoy winning with people, not just, I love to win. I'm very competitive, but I realized at some point that if you're not winning with people and watching and helping other people win, that it's pretty empty.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Hannah. So I kind of hear that human connection. So empathy, listening, connecting and feeling with people and understanding where they're at was a sign for you. So yeah, thank you. And then Sal, I'm going to try and see if Sal's available, and we'll see if he comes on. And okay. Gareth, what about you? Introduce yourself and how, like, going through this and learning more, how have you kind of seen where you've been a servant leader and how it's become, like how it became a part of you?
Debbie, I'm Gareth Warr. I'm the Director of Forestry with Port Blakely, based in Olympia. I think my sort of recognition of servant leadership was really around how I was managed by two different leaders. And one was very much a servant leadership, and the other was very much a micromanager, and very much there was a lot of ego involved and taking of credit, and a lot of, whereas and so I think that was really what sparked my journey on. I sort of saw the impact that it had on me and how happy I was in my work, and I think that inspired me to become passionate about servant leadership and try and be that type of leader for the folks that I work with, rather than the other.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate Gareth being on the spot too, both he and Hannah a little bit here as we ask these questions. So thank you. And you know what, I'm going to include myself here just to give you another purview. So me, I'm Debbie Heiser, and part of what I was fortunate enough to work for a communication industry. I worked for Sprint Publishing and Advertising, and I'm aging myself, but I sold Yellow Pages back in the day when Yellow Pages were a thing. And I worked for a company that they didn't just sell Yellow Pages, but we talked about helping people with their hopes, wishes, and dreams. Because if I'm helping clients bring other clients or customers into their business to make more money, they can then go do their hopes, wishes, and dreams, which is what I say I help people do today. And so for me, servant leadership is a disposition because I have a strong urgency and desire to help people step into their best self and do what they feel called to do in the world. So to make that impact. So there's many different ways that you can be a servant leader. And so thank you for all of you that have shared that. And Sal, I'm going to throw out there is once you're able to join, just feel free to throw something in the chat or just say something so that we know you're available, and I'll keep asking.
I can hear you.
Oh, fantastic. So Sal, introduce yourself and how you kind of figured out that you were a servant leader.
Hello, everyone. My name is Saleh Brahim, Director of Clams and Oyster Farming for Taylor Shellfish, Class 38. Best class infinity, right? So, to be honest with you, being a leader, I think it's kind of in my blood. It's one of those things that I'm very passionate about, encouraging and seeing people succeed in life. And so that's really important to me, to just kind of encourage and I guess persuade in some way, just kind of nudge them along to see their full potential. And that's always been a thing that I've been kind of noticing since I was young, playing basketball and just kind of encouraging my teammate to win the game and things like that. But to be honest, I didn't know that was a servant leader characteristic, but it is something that I do enjoy doing all the time, and it's very rewarding to see the outcome of it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sal. I appreciate that. And then we had something in the comments, make sure to look at that. And I just want to add a small thing there about be the type of leader who will mention someone else's name in a room full of opportunity. And as you think about leading your people and managing your people, I also, whenever I teach new leaders, I suggest to them, think about what you're saying to those people that you report to, because the people you report to, the view they have of your people is usually the view that you create. So the perception that you create with that upper management is usually driven by you, because they don't have a lot of interaction necessarily with the teams that you manage and lead. So just be conscious of that. And I love that. Yes, it's about being humble. So and then what I want to do, and as we go through this, there's a couple of questions that we'll have each of the panel members answer, and some that will just bounce off of different people. But this one I'd like each person to also do. And I think we'll start with Hannah. Tell us what servant leadership means to you and how you've seen it make a difference in your own life and business.
Yeah. So servant leadership to me, I think at one point I thought it meant just being nice all the time and like being in, that person who's always really encouraging. And I think that that's a huge part of it. But as I've grown and led, I've realized that it's about being willing to have the really difficult conversations, right? To serve the greater good. And sometimes there's a conversation that has to be had with someone who's dragging the whole team down, and being willing to have that conversation, or to recognize like, hey guys, there's an elephant in the room and we're going to talk about it. And so to be that person that can say, hey, we have to have some discomfort because it's ultimately going to get us to a better future. I think that's what I see in servant leadership is being willing to take those steps and be looking for the better future versus just sitting around and thinking like, okay, everybody can be happy right now. But if there's, an impending future that's not good, then what we truly do to serve is by saying, hey, we have to tackle this difficult conversation. And so I think, at least for me, that seeing that modeled and being part of those conversations, or having someone stop me and say, hey, this is something that you're doing that's impacting people negatively, and seeing that my reaction to that was that I wanted to change. It hurts, but I was so thankful to get that information and have the opportunity to improve, has inspired me to be willing to have those difficult conversations, or push us into some discomfort in order to get to a better future.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. You bring to mind a model that I used to show people, and it's very simple. It's a sketch, which I am not an artist, of a sailboat. And if you think about the people that you lead as a sailboat, you have that 10% that are the sail, right? They're the ones that are doing phenomenal in that role and the superstars of your team. And then sometimes, hopefully not, but sometimes you have an anchor. that kind of pulls a little bit and rubs a little bit. And then about 80 to 90% of your team is the boat hole. And if you think about it, you can sail without a sail and you can sail without an anchor, but you have to have that boat hole. And so it's important not only to have those difficult conversations because it can drag the whole boat down, but those people that are your mainstay that make it work day in, day out, it's important to remember that they're there, and having those conversations sometimes adds, because they see what happens on both ends, right? The difficult conversations and then the other part of it. So it's important to make sure that you're looking at all of those people in that boat hole too, that can sometimes be overlooked. So yeah, I heard a lot of conceptualization in that, foresight, self-awareness, a lot of different characteristics. So thank you. So Dave, let's pop to you. Tell us what servant leadership means to you and how you've seen that play out in your life.
First off, I'd like to say that Hannah did a really nice job of articulating those concepts, and I totally agree. I guess the concept of servant leadership, to me, distilled all the way down, is basically just trying to fix a little more than you break every day. And a lot of times, I was listening to Hannah and those tough conversations, and I've had a lot of tough conversations in my life, but the skill that you can develop over time is the ability to recognize those tough conversations coming. And oftentimes you can intervene much earlier in the process and say, gosh, I just, and sometimes it's just a little asking for clarification. Sometimes it's a little but these little skills that really help you. A couple of observations that I've got after a lifetime of this is one, it is amazing what you can get done if you don't care who gets the credit. That's one. Number two, an ego is the most expensive thing you'll ever try to own. And three, I'm missing three, but those skills that you build up, that you develop, and also patience. Patience is really important. Stu Bledsoe, one of the founders of the ag forestry program, always said in the Olympia seminar, he always said, just remember, once or twice in your life, you'll get everything you want right now. But the rest of the time, it's very important to remember that 20% a year for 5 years is 100%. And so learning that patience, trying to instill that patience in other people, try to find another way when you really desperately want to slap somebody to find another way to help them arrive at that. Because ultimately, in my experience, at least, you'll never change anybody's mind. But oftentimes you can get information to people where over time you'll notice that they have changed their mind, but they changed it themselves. So servant leadership to me is kind of manifesting those skills and trying to use them in the context of our business, but also in our daily lives.
Great. Thank you, Dave. I appreciate that. And Sal, what about you? Tell us about what servant leadership means to you and how you've seen it impact your organization and your life.
Well, a servant leader, I would have to say, just from my experience, just kind of putting yourself in, your crew's or your employees' shoes, and listening and feeling what's their challenges. This way you can help them overcome some of those challenges. But, ultimately, I just feel that working with them closely and just knowing them and, listen to their needs is what a servant leader myself would do, is just making sure that I'm listening to them and just paying close attention and working with them well, I guess.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Sal. I hear listening is the cornerstone or the foundation of servant leadership. So I heard a lot about what you say was just listening deeply to people. So thank you very much. And Gareth, what about you?
Thanks, Debbie. Yeah, I think that the aspect that resonates with me, and I hadn't really thought about as healing, but healing is a good way to, cover it off. And it's that commitment to the growth of people and just, changing that sort of culture in your organization to be a supportive growth environment and that continuous learning. You know, I think we're all taking those steps. We're here today, and I think this is going to be more and more important, because the younger generation that's coming through, they expect to be managed by servant leaders. You know, the expectations have changed. Spending a bit of time around my nieces and nephews at Thanksgiving, and the sort of, we sort of describe it a little bit as woke culture, but I mean, those are the people that are coming out, and their expectations of how they're going to be managed. And we as managers need to be prepared for that. And those are the people that we're going to have to manage. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Gareth. And I kind of heard all of you in some way, shape, or form too talk about pulling out the teacher from within, right? Like it can be impactful if you're highly directive, and there are times for that, but it's also important with this commitment to the growth of people to ask the right questions. And if you don't get an answer, to ask a better question so that they can come to that realization. And it just is so much more powerful too. And that's part of what I was hearing all of you say too. So thank you. And so I want to ask, this was a question that came from one of the participants. And so I'd like to start with Sal. Sal, what tips do you have for us to be better listeners?
I think I just kind of mentioned some of it. It's just basically, putting yourself in their shoes and just understanding and working with them closely. And, that's probably the key to successful listeners, just being out and being involved with them at daily routines, and just know your people better.
Great, thank you. And Dave, what about you? Any tips on how to listen better?
I think the first tip is that the good Lord gave us one mouth and two ears. And that's as a good starting point. That's about the ratio that you should probably use. But I think the empathy is a big thing. I think that once you've put yourself in someone else's shoes, you can have that conversation because you're talking as equals. And I think that's a really important, and that's a tool that you develop over time. But I think it's a really, really important one.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. And you bring to mind this idea of self-awareness. And as a leader, when we know what our values are, we know what our mission is, when we know who we are as people, it's much easier to put the ego aside and be humble. It's much easier to ask the questions. It's much easier to listen because we're not thinking about what we want to say next. Right? We're not thinking about our own agenda, but trying to feel into that other person's shoes and understand that. So yes, thank you very much. Hannah, what about you? Any ideas on ways to be a better listener?
Sure, yes. This is something I work on a daily basis. I was not born a good listener, and I probably am, there will always be opportunity to learn in that. I was raised in a family of 4 daughters, and we are interrupters. So learning to be a better listener is something I have and will continue to have to work on. For me, I think it's taken a lot of work in self-awareness to become a better listener, right? Paying attention to, when did I listen well? When did I not? What created that scenario, and how do I replicate that? One thing though, that is my go-to is I taught myself 5 words. Tell me more about that. And I decided that I could memorize that, right? I can set that as like a default. And so when I really need to listen, it helps me get into that space. So if I start a conversation and I feel myself not listening, it's like, okay, get grounded and say these 5 words because I have them memorized. And that buys me just a little bit of time to overcome whatever's distracting me, right? Sometimes it's like an initial gut reaction, like, I don't like what this person is saying. And so rather than responding, I can just say, okay, deep breath, tell me more about that. And that has become the cue for me to really turn on those 2 ears, right? And to listen. So for me, that is something that I continue to struggle with, but that's just something I carry in my back pocket because I know that I need something that is like a physical switch, like, telling me that I need to listen in this moment.
Yeah. And Hannah, part of what I loved about what you said is I call it the great pause, because in the pause is where transformation occurs. And that's where we open up our minds and our hearts and our will to be able to, way back when we talked about listening a few weeks ago, that's where we open up to this more generative listening. But if we're not pausing, if we don't take that pause and take that deep breath and say, okay, tell me more about this, please, then it can end up being more of just a dialogue back and forth where you both are trying to get your agendas across. So yeah, thank you. Gareth, let's finish up with you here on listening. What tips do you have for us to be better listeners?
I think my top one is just being aware of your body language. And, a little bit of that is sort of as being about that presencing, like, being free of distractions and focusing and nodding and sort of, engaging. There were some great examples, but even online, both Dave and Hannah, when they were talking and just showing interest and engagement. And I think that's an important sort of thing to keep a note of, and just be aware.
Great.
When you're listening.
Yes, thank you. And I also, Diana put something in the chat here that I want to mention too. She's talking about cultural communication styles are also critical. And it is important to understand, sometimes I call this organizational savvy when you're in your own business, but understanding kind of the rules of communication, and understanding too that when you are talking to people that have grown up in different filters, and, I know for myself, looking at sometimes my privilege and thinking, okay, here I'm in this lane of what I think I know, but opening yourself up to that fourth level of listening to hear and understand other people's experiences and filters that they go through. And also knowing too, one of the things I loved about Zoom is it like almost pushes you into that almost awkward silence. So when someone asks a question, everybody pauses because everybody's unmuting and they're not sure who's going to unmute first, but it allows people to kind of stop for a moment. So it is important also, thank you, Diane, for bringing that up, to take in mind that everybody is coming to a conversation with different filters and backgrounds and experiences. So, and to be conscious of that. Okay, so let's move on to our next question. And I'm going to start out with Dave, I think this time. And because you also have talked about this giving back to community and this helping others grow. And so what have you found to be the most rewarding in helping other people grow?
Wow. The growth is it is fun. It's fun to watch people grow. It's fun to watch people evolve, to arrive at different places. And there's there's very few things more rewarding than that, to see somebody come up with a really positive experience and a success, and then to watch that build and go on. I'm watching young male and female members of our ag community now, and to watch them evolve and grow and be in positions, be in roles that I was once in, and watch them grow and expand. And I'm sorry, I got a few office interruptions going on here, but that's really rewarding. The other thing for me, oftentimes there are little things that kind of manifest themselves as being really rewarding. I was on the school board. I was board chair one year, and there was a really contentious issue. And boy, it just went on and on and on. And I said right off the bat, everybody's going to get a chance to talk. And I thought I did a nice job of chairing the meeting. And at the end, one of the people that was really opposed to what I was doing, to what we were doing as a school district, came up to me and he said, I still don't agree with this, but I was heard and I was respected, and I'll accept it. And that was, those sorts of things really float your boat later on in life when you look back and you say, okay, people did listen. We used leadership skills, and we had that benefit. So
great. Thank you
I
for
apologize for the interruptions. There's a farm going on in my background that wasn't supposed to be.
No worries. No worries. So I'd like to ask Hannah, actually, and I'll ask a couple of you this question too, but when you think about helping other people grow, what's been the most rewarding for you? And it can be people that have directly reported to you or not.
Awesome. Yeah, which is perfect, because I do want to acknowledge the question from Heather in the chat box, which is perfect. This ties perfectly about whether they report to you or not. And I think for me, most of my roles have actually been I have no direct authority or official authority in the roles that I've served. And I think for me, the thing that is most rewarding is just when somebody comes back, when I listened to somebody, because I found that listening was the number one thing that made a difference, that caused people to trust me, to work with me, was just listening, and then asking questions or responding to what I heard, right? Whether it was offering suggestions, asking questions, or if I had influence to use, to then using that influence to help respond to the issue that they were bringing. But I think the thing that has been most rewarding is when they come back and share, and they want to share with you, that they grew or that they made something better or what came of the situation. And so that is what gives me the greatest joy, is when somebody has grown, and if I had a part in that, or just got to be a part of witnessing that and getting to celebrate with them, both that they grew, and then just that when you improve a situation or when something improves in the organization, then the opportunities for even more people to grow emerge from that.
Perfect. And Hannah, part of what I'm hearing you say is that part of this commitment to the growth of people and helping people grow, particularly if you're not in direct, well, even if you are in direct reporting relationships, it's also about using that persuasion or influence, but in a way that they see the benefit of it themselves and move forward to grow and are committed to themselves to grow. And to me, that's a beautiful thing to see that happen. So thank you for sharing that example. Sal, what about you? Tell us a little bit about an example for you of where you've helped someone else grow into something that they wanted to grow into, and they were either reporting to you or they weren't. It was someone else in your organization or in something that you volunteered for.
That's really a good question. So, it's a really good feeling when you say somebody that you worked hard and promote or just kind of encourage, and you see them where they are today versus maybe 5-6 years ago. It's an amazing feeling, and sometimes I think the most rewarding feeling is just knowing that they didn't see that in themselves, and you saw that, or we saw that, and we're able to help, encourage, persuade, whatever you want to call that, and they are who they are today because of your assistant or your persuasion or help. To me, that's an amazing feeling to see from day one to where they are today. It's just, I guess you would say, it's probably priceless in a way, and it's just great.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Sal. And Gareth, I'm going to finish up with you on this one, and then I'm going to pop to one of the questions that came in on the chat and one that came in the previous webinar. But tell us about a time when you found it super rewarding that someone went out and did something that helped them grow as a direct relationship to something that you influenced.
Thanks, Debbie. I think I've got two extremes. One is, a sort of a sub-performing employee. I think that, and had a lot going on, and we were, as now sort of a star in the organization. And then the other one was a high-performing employee that actually sort of got poached. And it's always a shame to lose good people, but I mean, building somebody up, and, at some point in a smaller organization, you can't fulfill their needs or their growth, and I think being okay to let people go and being thankful and proud of what they achieved, I guess, that small time. So yeah, I think those are the two examples that have been, most fulfilling.
Great. Thank you, Gareth. You bring to mind something else that in my corporate days that I would train new leaders on, is that it's really important to succession plan. You should be developing people, now making sure, because not everyone wants to be in your position. Not everyone wants to be the CEO. So really understanding and asking your people what they want to grow into within your organization is really important. But then making sure that you have someone to take your place, not only so that you can go on vacation and feel comfortable leaving, but also if an opportunity opened up for you, that your team and your part of the organization is ready to go. And that succession planning and helping them get to that point. So thank you, Gareth. That sounds like something you did, because the other thing I talk about is when someone is, I think you used the word poached, when someone comes after your people, that's a compliment, right? At the testament to the quality of people that you have. So thank you for that. So I want to kind of go in the same strain, but a slightly different angle. And one of the questions that came through, and I saw it, and that's kind of why I geared the last conversation, but I want to ask this directly. How do you demonstrate servant leadership when you're not in a managerial role within your organization? Let's say you're a project manager or you're an individual contributor. How have you seen that work or have been in that situation and utilize servant leadership? And I'm going to open that up to, let's see, Dave, you're off mute. So let's start with you.
The question again, please.
Yeah. So how have you seen servant leadership demonstrated by an individual contributor versus someone that manages people?
I think I think there are opportunities over the entire scale to demonstrate servant leadership. And it's important to remember that oftentimes the most powerful statement you'll ever make is a thoughtful question. And I've seen those come from right field, left field, center field, and you really know. I've watched them in the boardroom as board chair with the Farm Credit Bank. A couple of board members. There's a thoughtful question. It just sails out there. It's a thoughtful question. It's not a statement, but it puts in place that cascade of events that has a good resolution to the whole thing. And so I think it's really important to understand that servant leadership isn't just the top people. It's everybody has that ability, and everybody, the people that come to the top are people that display it in a number of ways, but you see it every day in a thoughtful question, a generous comment, things that facilitate the right outcome. And I think, just as an aside, I think that's really important today. Important to ask those thoughtful questions. I remember there's a time in your life when you're right all the time, and I was that way about 17, and it was a wonderful, heady time. But I remember having a conversation with my mother, who was a saint, and saying, "Look, I'm right, and I know I'm right." And my mother turned to me in the kindest way, and she says, "David, you may be right, but are your comments helpful?" And I think all of us need to ask that question all the time, because we can escalate or we can de-escalate. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dave. That was a huge wisdom nugget there. Thank you. Sal, let's go to you. So where have you seen, or did I already ask you this question? No, I didn't. Thank you. I swerved there for a second. Sorry. So Sal, explain to us where you've seen an individual contributor demonstrate servant leadership characteristics.
Well, I'll start by saying, a leader will always be a leader of their action. And so regardless of what they do, when they do it, and their responsibility, they will always act as a leader. So I'll give you kind of a story. This was probably 20 years ago. I was kind of managing quite a few people, and did not have the title of being a leader or anything like that. But it's one of those things that, you felt you were responsible of the team, and you need to act upon and make good decision and good judgment call in whatever you need to do. So in my opinion, a leader will always be a leader, and it's basically your action, what you do, that defines a person as a leader.
Great. Thank you, Sal. I know I find I've seen other people do the same, where they fall into a leadership position and they don't necessarily mean to become the leader, but they do. And some of that too, Dave, as you were talking, is just having that true intention of curiosity, right? Versus I want to be right, which is the victim triangle, that persecutor. So I want to shift gears here just a little bit and ask the second question that came in the webinar last week. And so, Gareth, I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to ask everybody on the panel this, because I think it will be good to find some different examples of ways that you've done this. So how have you engaged employees who are profoundly disengaged and very resistant to change?
Great question. I'm lucky enough that I haven't had too many examples of those, but when I have, I've been quite curious about the reasons, like just sort of asking those clarifying questions and trying to dig in. And usually, well, it's either one or two things. In my experience, it's either been a personal issue, or there's been a past example where things have gone so wrong, and culturally it's sort of changed how those issues are viewed in the organization. There was generally somebody got fired because of some, but it's probably all I've got at the moment. Thanks, Debbie. All right.
Okay. Thank you, Gareth. So I heard, again, kind of that curiosity and asking some of the whys without coming right out and saying, why are you resistant to this? But really trying to dig in and understand the history that's happened with that, because usually people are hooked and resist something because of something that has happened in their past that hasn't been a positive experience. So thank you for that. Hannah, what about you? How have you engaged people that have been disengaged or resistant to change?
Yeah. Such a great question, and so challenging. I'm someone who loves change generally, especially when I'm the one driving it. I've been told that I don't like change as much when somebody else is suggesting it. And I think to some extent that's probably true for all of us, right? I had a mentor who, at a time when I was really frustrated, it was my first role in a managerial position. So I had always been a leader kind of by influence, like without official authority. And so this was the first time where I was leading and I had some authority, and I was extremely angry because I just could not figure out why people didn't want to try new things or do things a new way. And this mentor said, she told me a similar story about a time in her life. And she said that one of her staff members had told her, it's not that we don't want to, it's that we don't know how. And I remember when she shared that story, these light bulbs going off in my head, and I realized that I had to be more curious, and I started spending more time and asking questions. And I found that, with the team that I had, it wasn't that they were opposed to the new things. It was that I was so excited, and I think I thought that I had explained things and I hadn't, right? So it wasn't that they didn't like the idea, but it was that they didn't know how to get from where we were to where I was saying that, we should be. And I needed to be willing to walk along that and come into where we were and work with them on how do we get where we want to go. And so from that, I've taken away this question that helps me when I'm frustrated in these positions, when I'm with someone who's just really disengaged or just unmovable on something, to really start with the question, is it because they don't want to or because they don't know how? And I have found that question is really helpful, and it helps, first of all, get me into a place of curiosity rather than frustration. And secondly, those are two different approaches, right? If someone doesn't know how, then if we can get to the root of that, then it's not that they don't want to, it's just that they don't know how. And that we can overcome, right? It's just like, okay, let's equip you. Let's figure out what you need or what we need to do to get us there. If someone doesn't want to, then, that's a whole different issue. And sometimes being willing to have that conversation of, hey, the ship is sailing this way, and if you don't want to go this way, then we got to invite you off the ship. But also sometimes then also if I'm in that curious space, I can figure out why they don't want to. And sometimes it's a really legitimate like concern, like, whoa, we didn't think of that. This is a huge important thing. We need to go back to the drawing board. So, but I think it really comes to getting first and foremost, getting into a space where I can be curious about the person and what's driving their behavior.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. You also bring to mind, there's a great model out there. And if you Google this, you should be able to come up with some information, but it's called Situational Leadership. And it's a Ken Blanchard model about when it's appropriate to give high direction and when it's appropriate to kind of be the cheerleader. But it's because of that idea, Hannah, that you talked about, where sometimes people don't know what to do, but sometimes they don't understand the values. So the motivation isn't there because they don't understand the impact, and so they don't want to do it. So yeah, thank you very much. Dave, what about you? How have you helped engage employees who have been really disengaged or resistant to change that's happening?
Good question, especially today. Helping employees engage gets back to empathy, it gets back to listening, all those things. I have a couple of observations though. One is that you can use all the tools you need. One of my weaknesses personally is I go too far. I'll sit and I'll listen and I'll try to change this and I'll say that and I'll change this and I'll change that. And at the end of the day, you've gone years in a relationship that you shouldn't have. You should have just said, look, it's obvious that these aren't questions. These are basic philosophical differences, and we should just move on. So I want to make that observation, because if you're a person like me that tends to be really high on empathy, really high on those things, you need to remind yourself that you have a responsibility to yourself, to your partners, and your business, or your company as well. So that's an observation I'd like to share. But I think the listening, I think Hannah articulated it very well. Listening, empathy, explaining, asking people to articulate what they're thinking. Oftentimes you can ask a point blank question 100 times and not get anything. But if you come at it from an angle and say, well, just try and articulate what is it you're thinking here, and if you can start that conversation, whatever it is, it doesn't matter whether it's fishing, football, or anything else. But if you can start that conversation on a good track, then you can move the conversation around to what's really the problem. So yeah. There you go.
Thank you, Dave. I kind of heard a couple of things there. One is the law of sacrifice, which says sometimes you have to sacrifice something to open up to the greater good. And that could be too, that maybe this person that's causing a lot of this resistance, and what you're saying, sometimes that relationship goes on for years when it shouldn't have. It's not good for that other person either. And so allowing that to go forward so that they can step into something that's better for them is important too. So thank you for that. And I forgot the second one. So we're going to move on to Sal. Sal, tell us, how have you, what are some tips and techniques that you've used to help you engage employees that are really resistant to change?
Well, like everybody is aware, changes is a difficult thing, and not everybody accept that or like that. But I think a few important things that I try to do when we're having changes, one is probably the communication. Communicating with teams and letting them know why we're having these changes. Is it the company changes, or is it law changes that's going on? And listen to their concern and what they have to say, just be empathy about it, and then you inform them why we're doing this. And that's probably the first few things that help me become successful in my team, is just communicating and listening to and informing them why we're making changes. And sometimes they don't realize these changes are a benefit to the employees and not the company. And sometimes they don't hear that, and they don't know that, so they think changes are always bad.
Yeah, Sal, thank you for that, because when you think about change, and many of you have probably heard about change management, but the first thing that people think of is what they're losing. And so if we can help them process through, and in some cases it's a little bit of grief, if we can help them process through that thought of what they're losing, then it clears it away so that they can see what they'll be gaining in the future. And that's part of what I heard you saying, is also communicating and helping them see that as well. So thank you for that. I am going to ask each panelist within about 30 seconds or so that we can kind of finish up with our, Hannah's like, what, 30 seconds? I say that because it ends up being a little bit longer, but within about 30 seconds, 30 to 45 seconds, if each of you could just state any like last kind of parting thoughts that you have about going forward in this world that we live in today and being a servant leader in training. I would love to just hear any final thoughts that people have or something burning on your mind about that. So Gareth, let's start with you.
Thanks, Evie. I just something that came up for me, listening to Sal, and I, really resonate with the, that communication, that empathy. For me, it's kind of being there in the trenches with them. When there's difficult change going on, you need to be hands-on, and you need to be there supporting people and experiencing what's going on too. I think that just being there for folks and feeling what they're feeling and being part of the solution there. So without micromanaging and being overbearing.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Gareth. Hannah, I'm going to finish up with you on the two of you, because I know both of you have a few things to get ready to finish this up, and then I'll move to Dave and Sal. So tell us anything burning on your mind about servant leadership.
Yeah. I think I'll share an aha moment that I had. So I was really digging into the concept of healing a few months back, and the idea of healing as a characteristic, and what does that mean? And something I found was I realized that healing, or an article said, the best healers are systems thinkers. And I had this aha moment around healing is not necessarily just like being there emotionally for our people and stepping into their shoes, but truly thinking about the systems that we create and investing our time into the way that we do business and the processes and the communication, that all of that is creating healing within our organizations and creates opportunities for growth. And so I think it was a big aha, because I finally felt like, okay, I understand more about this, but it was also a big aha because I realized, a lot of what we do in the day-to-day, it's easy to feel like, oh no, I'm not doing the servant leadership thing because I didn't spend my whole day listening to people, or, I think for me, it was just such an aha that by listening to where the problems are and whether we're an individual contributor or a leader, if we're helping to change where there's gaps or make changes in the system, that we are serving the greater whole, and that is a piece of servant leadership. So that is what I'll leave you with, this aha. And I encourage each of you to really dig into the resources, because learning about servant leadership and digging into these 10 characteristics has been so fascinating and so inspiring. And I think that it's what we really need in our industries. So I'm so glad that you're all here. And I am going to hop off camera and deal with some of the behind the scenes. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. So Dave, in 30 seconds or so, what's some final parting words you'd like to have?
I know anybody overhearing 30 seconds and me just in the office just rolled their eyes, but I'll give it a shot. I guess my grandpa used to say the only thing for sure in life is change. I think that's very true. I think the change rate is expanded. I think the responsibility of servant leaders is huge right now. I think there's a real need for servant leadership, and just a little example. When I was on the school board 25 years ago, we really were trying to teach kids information. We tried to teach them facts, information. And now, 30 years later, you don't need information. You've got all the facts at your fingertips. What we need now, the skills we need now, are filters. We need to sift the wheat out of the chaff, to use a farmer term. But using servant leadership to help us move to that next step, I think it requires, it requires empathy and all those things. And it also requires us all to feel like we're part of something bigger than ourselves, and that we're contributing to something bigger than ourselves. And we're asking those thoughtful questions. But there's a lot of discomfort and conflict, and those servant leaders can really pull that out, pull the good things out, ask the thoughtful questions, de-escalate instead of escalate, and filter. And I think that's my 30 seconds, I think.
Great. Thank you, Dave. And Sal, in about 30 seconds, leave us with some parting words, and then I'm going to do the same and turn it over to Gareth.
So my final words, I would say the most important thing that people don't realize is gratitude and empathy. It's the power of saying thank you. It's pretty amazing. So a few years ago, I took over this farm, and I was kind of just talking about update and status and how performance and things like that. And I thanked everybody. And after that meeting, a comment was made. He said to me, "I've never heard a director or a manager say thank you to their employee before, ever." And so that's one thing that I wish that people say more, is thank you. It's really a good feeling and very encouraging words to motivate, encourage your team to do more. Because and one thing I always say, saying thank you is cheap. It's free. It doesn't cost any money at all. But the rewarding for your people that's doing the actual work, it's really priceless. And it's a huge encouragement to say to the team that they did a good job. Thank you.
Great. Sal, thank you. And in the essence of time, I'm just going to leave you with a couple of just quick things. As a reminder, I am gifting out 30 minutes with me if you want to gain some clarity or talk more about servant leadership and what that means, and get some coaching. You can sign up for something with me at leadyourlituplife.com. And I want to leave you with a reminder of the best test is, do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? And what is the effect on the least privileged in society? Will they benefit or at least not be further deprived? By Robert Greenleaf. And Gareth, I know I'm only leaving you a couple of minutes, but if you want to wrap us up here, that would be fantastic. And thank you very much to all of our panelists.
Thanks, Debbie. I love that. That's great. And thanks too to Dave, Sal, and Hannah for sharing with us today. I appreciate the servant leadership discussions we've had and look forward to continuing to build my skills in this area with you all. Thanks to all you too, our attendees, for joining us. So as you know, these webinars are available at no charge. However, we'd like to request payment in terms of providing some feedback for both Debbie and Ag Forestry on these series. So you'll shortly receive a survey link in your inbox, and we appreciate your participation. Thank you again. We'll look forward to seeing you all in February. We will improve our ability to navigate conflict and the communicating across different series. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.